Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Thorley, and I am Head of Science Information for NERC, the Natural Environment Research Council, where, amongst other things, I have responsibility for our network environmental data centres and implementation of our data policy. So, on behalf of the ESPA programme, I'd like to thank you for joining this webinar, which is going to be about how we meet the data management and archiving requirements that the ESPA programme places on you as ESPA funded researchers. So our speakers today are Rick Stewart, who works at the NERC Environmental Information Data Centre based at the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology in Lancaster, and Veerle van Eden, who is based at the UK Data Service at the University of Essex. David has basically been through the list of housekeeping things I had also to mention to you. Just to say, if questions occur to you as you go along, I think David has put up the question box. So just type a question or a query into that box. We'll be monitoring that as we go along. If there's something we need to answer straight away, we'll pick it up as we speak. Otherwise, we'll be reviewing and going through the questions during the question-answer session at the end of the session. And as David said, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the presentations will be made available in due course. So before we hear from Rick and Veerle, I want to give you a brief overview of why the ESPA partners and research funders more generally, not just NERC and the SRC, regard effective data management and the need to make data open and shareable as such a critical activity. So back in 2015, 4 of the leading representatives of international science came together to produce the Science International Accord on Open Data in a Big Data World. The headline on the web page which introduces this accord is Global Science Requires Open Data, and I can provide the link to that when we send round details of the talk afterwards. The 4 bodies were International Council of Science, ICSU, the International Social Science Council, the Inter-Academy Partnership, and the World Academy of Sciences. Now, this was a fairly high-level strategic document which basically laid out the sort of high-level principles of why we need to do data sharing and to manage our data effectively. But those high-level principles have been mirrored at a national level as well. So in the UK in 2016, the UK Concordat on Open Research Data was agreed between the major research funders, the Research Council, Wellcome Trust, HEFCE, and the other funding councils, and the representatives, University UK as representative of the universities in the UK. And this sets out 10 key principles which researchers, research institutions, and funders need to follow to support the effective management and sharing of research data. So these high-level principles are mirrored in the data policies of research funders such as NERC and ESRC. So the research councils themselves, well, NERC and ESRC especially, have had data policies in place for a long time. Both NERC and ESRC have had policies in existence for over 20 years now. And partly this is a recognition that has always been there of a long-term value and often irreplaceable nature of data within the economic and social sciences, where we're recording, well, basically as collecting data, we're taking time-specific snapshots of complex dynamic systems. Basically, you can't re-measure yesterday's rainfall in a week's time. You can't go out and survey social attitudes next year to represent how people felt about things 2 years ago. So both our research councils have high-level statements on the values of data. NERC considers that any data generated through NERC supported activities need to be properly managed to ensure their long-term availability to support data sharing and reuse by others. SRC considers that data are the main assets of the research phase fund, and they recognise these data as valuable long-term resources that really need to be managed and made available for reuse in the long term. So these high-level statements translate into the detailed data policies that we as funders have. So NERC basically requires that if you are funded by NERC, and that is wholly or partially funded by NERC, even if we're only one of a set of funding partners, the data you collect, the environmental data you collect of long-term value need to be offered to one of the NERC data centres for long-term management and dissemination. So Environmental Information Data Centre, which Rick represents, is one of the 5 NERC environmental data centres which span the disciplines that NERC supports. SRC's policy requires you as an award holder to make use of existing standards. Standards are the glue that makes data management work. They're vital for the effective long-term management and dissemination of data. So to use standards and to make those data available for further reuse. And like NERC, ESRC supports a data archive for UK Data Service, who have that responsibility for managing data and ensuring long-term access. Obviously, Vila is here to speak on behalf of the work that the UK Data Service does. So it's probably worth quickly reviewing why is open data access, why is good data management important. And I tend to come at this from two angles. The first is around the reproducibility of research, around ensuring the openness and transparency of the research process and the integrity of the research we carry out. Basically, if you carry out research, your research isn't completed until you've published the results of those research and you've made your data available for others. So other people may want to challenge your research, they may want to try and reproduce your research, they may want to try and take your research a step further forward. And an essential prerequisite of that is having access to the data that underpins your research, what some people call the data behind the graph. And basically, to demonstrate the validity, the transparency and the openness of your research, those data need to be available for others to access if they request it. The days of trust me, I'm a researcher, I'm wearing a white coat, you can just trust me, are long since gone, especially now in the digital age where we are managing much larger, much more complex data sets. Those data sets just need to be open for other people to examine your research in more detail. The second strand is what I call reuse and repurposing. That's to allow the data to be used for innovation in the broadest sense, to be reused to do more research, to be done other and different research, or to be used by others for other innovative purposes. And that may well include the development of value-added information products or value-added services where there's data. Now, in many instances, quite a lot of research data sets are not going to have a commercial value, but especially in the environmental sciences, there are some which quite useful services have been developed from. So, but we don't know what those are going to be. So as research funders, we want to make the outputs of the research we fund as widely and as easily accessible as possible. The phrase I tend to use is, let's get the stuff out there, let's get it used. We can't prejudge what people are going to do with it, but it's beholden on us as researchers and members of the research community to make the data openly available for others to use. So from this, I hope you can see that there are expectations placed on researchers across the research spectrum. So this is not specific just to researchers within ESPA. There will be ESPA-specific implementation details, which Rick and Vila can go into in a bit more detail. But what they're doing within the seminar in terms of providing you with guidance information is how we implement those much more generic policy level details at a program specific level. So we can see these expectations are basically based on requirements from funders, which I've been through in terms of our data policies we have in place for those we fund. There are also legislative requirements of why you need to manage your data and make them available. If you work in environmental sciences, you may be familiar with the INSPIRE directive, the INSPIRE regulations in the UK, which require public sector organisations to give access to a range of environmental data sets. There's a whole sweep of freedom of information legislation which applies within universities, where people can legitimately request research data. So, and the fact that maybe you haven't finished fully documenting them, or you haven't worked them up enough, or you're not quite sure where they are, isn't a barrier to having to satisfy requests and freedom of information. So basically having good data management processes and practices in place is an essential prerequisite to supporting the legislative environment around access to data. However, there are also legislative constraints on access to data under the data protection legislation, especially important within social science research involving human subjects. And again, we'll touch on those during the seminar. And I think finally it's worthwhile mentioning that publishers are now requiring a lot of publishers are requiring that the papers they produce, they want the data that underpin those papers to be available for others who want to look at that research in more detail, to reproduce or to challenge that research. So publishers such as Springer Nature, such as PLOS, Public Library of Science, such as Elsevier, have a requirement that the data that support research, their publications they're producing, are available and are deposited in recognised repositories. And both ESTS, the UK Data Service, and the EIDC are recognised repositories of these publishers. So these are the expectations on you as ESPA funded researchers to manage your data effectively and where appropriate to make these data openly available to others to share and to reuse.